So I grew up in a little city in the southwest called Plymouth, um, just on a border of Cornwall. Very good childhood, if I'm honest. I'm very fortunate and very grateful for it. Working class family, uh, terraced house in a regular neighborhood. Did what a lot of young men did. Who were born in the 80s and raised in the 90s, which is get up to mischief until the streetlights came on. All my friends were older than I was, which I believe helped me to grow up a little bit quicker than I should have. So Plymouth's a big military city. We've got a huge naval base. We have the Royal Marines headquarters down there. We've got army camps down there. The whole southwest of the UK is quite a big military hub. So growing up, I was kind of surrounded by it. All of my friends who were older than I was had already left school while I was still in school, and some of them had gone into the military. And I liked what their lives looked like. You know, when they came home on leave, they always seemed to have money. They were quite fit. They were always telling me these stories about driving tanks and shooting guns, and it sounded kind of cool. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do as I was approaching the end of school. But, you know, based on my love for health and fitness and sport, combined with what these friends were telling me, it seemed like a good idea to, you know, go down the military route. Well, I got the paperwork when I was 15 and a half. Got it signed by my parents because you had to be 16 back then to pursue that career, and then left school after doing my exams and went straight in at 17. I went to join the army because I didn't even know who the Royal Marines were. One of my friends who was in the tank regiment took me to the career centre when I was 15 and a half to get that paperwork. And when I asked my parents to sign it, they told me I had an uncle who was a former Royal Marine, and he lived halfway between our house and the Commando Training Centre. So that weekend, we went to visit him. Sat down, had a chat with him. He had done a full 22-year career, and he had gone from the rank of Marine, which is the Royal Marines equivalent of private, up to a captain in his 22-year career. And he told me all about the things he had done and experienced. He told me why the Royal Marines were slightly different to regular branches of the military. And then I went back to the career centre where I got my paperwork from originally and watched the Royal Marine recruitment video, and it just blew my mind. I get goosebumps now just thinking about that video. And from that moment, that was all I wanted to do. I wanted to see if I had what it took physically, mentally, and spiritually to be able to join this band of brothers that I'd seen and heard about. So Royal Marines are very specialised. We are naval, amphibious troops. If you were going to compare it, I think, to American military, we're kind of on par with the Navy SEALs. We're not special forces. We're like the step down from that, but a lot of Royal Marines do go on to fill those roles in the special forces. Went and started recruit training in February 2001, and the only way I can describe the first day and that first 2-week period would be like drinking from a fire hose. It's 1,000 mile an hour. There's too much information to take in. It's overwhelming. You're running everywhere. You have no idea what you're doing. It feels like you're drowning. It's overwhelming. It's scary. You're surrounded by, well, I was surrounded by 64 other men. I was still a boy. I was terrified. Most of the first week when I went to bed at night, I wanted to go home. I think one night I might have even cried. I detested it. I hated it. But for some reason, just stuck with it and took it day by day. I first deployed to Iraq in 2003 when I was 19, on something called Operation Telic 1, which was the initial push over the Kuwait Iraqi border. I deployed there for 3.5 months, came back physically and mentally in one piece, fortunately. But yeah, I experienced it at a very young age. It wasn't quite what I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to be a lot more action-packed for a Royal Marines commander on the front line. It was for some of my friends and colleagues, but for me, in the roles that I was fulfilling, I didn't really see a lot. The first 6 to 8 weeks, we were just sat in Kuwait, waiting for the call to go over the border. But the worst thing I think for me was the chemical weapon threat. So a lot of the time we would be sat in trenches in what we call Cat 3 Romeo, which is your full military uniform, with a NBC suit on the top, with a respirator on, with the hood up, sat in the desert heat, just, it sounds a bit exaggerated, but just waiting for your skin to start boiling and your lungs to start burning because you couldn't see or smell or detect any of these chemicals that were being used. So, when the alarms went off, you just sat in a trench hoping for the best. The first thing that I thought, well, the first thing that I knew was that this tour was going to be very different to Iraq because of the training. The training was very different. It was a lot more uh, focused and aggressive and intentional. Um, and I just got the vibe that this was going to be quite different. But I was actually looking forward to it. And I say that because my life at the time was a mess. And I thought getting away would be a good opportunity to recalibrate and, you know, get myself together, come back home, and then take my life in a new, more positive direction. So I was looking forward to it. So initially, when you go, we flew into a place called Camp Bastion, which was a big airfield, and it's not like I don't think many people imagine. So there was a Tim Hortons coffee shop there. There was a Pizza Hut and a Subway and um, clean showers, clean toilets, air conditioned accommodation, all that stuff. But that was for us just a temporary holding bay where we had to acclimatize our bodies to the conditions, prepare all of our kit and equipment, and then start running some last minute training serials as a troop and as a company just to make sure that we were as well prepared as we possibly could be. And I think I did about 4 days there and then was put on the back of a Chinook helicopter with some of the lads and flown out to a place called Forward Operating Base Robertson in the southern part of the Helmand province. You spend most of your time out on foot patrols, engaging with the civilians and the locals and conducting missions and operations, gathering intelligence, all those kind of normal, basic infantry style things that you do when you're out in these environments.
How did the Afghani locals take to the British military being there?
They were quite different. Some were pleased to see us there, some not so pleased. It was very difficult to determine who the civilians were to the soldiers because they all wore civilian clothing. But you got a general vibe when you walk through a village or an area. You got a vibe of how well or unwelcome you were received. Um, we also had intelligence, that we were fed that could tell us if there was anything ropey about to go on in the area. I think the most challenging thing is not knowing who's who. So you imagine you're patrolling through a village that, there's civilians walking around all over the place, heads popping out of doorways and from behind buildings. Everyone's wearing civilian clothes and you don't know who's who. So at any moment, someone could take a pot shot at you. They could detonate an improvised explosive device. So you're constantly on edge. So it was very difficult in that respect. But when you were engaged in a firefight, they were pretty fierce. They were pretty fierce. It was their land, their home, their terrain. They understood it way better than we did. And they were a formidable opponent, if I'm being honest. So we had been deployed to Afghanistan for about 3.5 months. We had been on numerous foot patrols and conducted various different missions and operations. We had come into contact with the enemy on numerous occasions and had several firefights in that time. But on the early hours of Christmas Eve morning, myself and some friends were called up to the headquarters compound of Forward Operating Base Robertson, and we were given a brief on what was to be our next foot patrol. Now, the idea of this patrol was, it was very, very basic compared to what we had done before. And effectively, we were told to leave the rear entrance of our camp in 2 groups with 8 men in each group. One would go north, one would go south. We were told then to patrol the immediate perimeter of the camp, pushing no more than 300 meters from the perimeter wall, and then meet at the front entrance of the camp. So now the opposite side, where we would finish up for the day and close things down. So compared to what we had been doing for the 3 months prior to this was very, very basic, low level infantry style soldiering. And we hadn't been given any extra intelligence to give us any extra cause for concern. So the time came and they opened up the rear entrance of the camp. I was second in command of the group that went north, the other guys went south. We went out and patrolled the area for about 4 or 5 hours. And then we both found ourselves at the opposite side of camp. So now at the front entrance, ready to finish up for the day. Now, the group that I was in were on this high feature, this high piece of ground we call the North Fort. Just down beneath us was Forward Operating Base Robinson. And then down beneath that, further still, was the other group of men that we had left with earlier in the day. So tactically, being on high ground, we're in a very advantageous position because not only can we see everything around us, but in a firefight, it's a lot easier to fight going down a hill than it is up. So our job in that situation is to give what we call overwatch, basically a form of protection for those other men. They would go back into camp, they would get behind the perimeter wall where they were safer, they would return the favor and provide protection for us. We'd peel off the high feature, go back into camp and finish up for the day. Now, normally, what you want to do if you're out on a patrol and you are going firm, if you're stopping, you want to get behind a building or a wall or a tree or a rock or something that's going to give you cover from view and cover from fire. But because we're on this high piece of ground, which was effectively a ridgeline, we didn't have any of those luxuries. Now, about 4 meters to my front, there was like a shallow bowl in the ground. So I had to look around, looked at what our options were, and I thought, given the terrain that we were operating in, if we jumped in this shallow bowl and got down on our stomachs, anybody that was looking up at us was going to have a very difficult time to see us, which means that they were going to have a very difficult time trying to engage us. So in my mind, in that environment, given that terrain, that was the best form of protection that I could have given those men. So I jumped in this shallow bowl. The rest of my half of the section followed behind me. They all started to take up their fire positions. The section commander, Corporal Helsby, had taken his half of the section off to the side, and he was doing the same with his guys. They all started getting into position, and when they were happy, they gave me the thumbs up. There were a couple of like last minute checks that I had to do, but when they were happy and I was happy, I started walking over towards the position that I selected for myself. And as I went to get down on my stomach, I put my right knee on the floor, and that was the moment I knelt on and detonated an improvised explosive device.
And what do you remember?
Everything. So initially when I knelt on this IED, I had no idea what I had done. Now you've got to imagine the terrain that we're working in. It's very sandy, very dusty. So when this thing exploded, it created this huge dust cloud. So temporarily I couldn't see anything. Now I could hear those other 7 men from my section shouting, trying to figure out what was going on. And I wasn't in any pain. So my instinct was that we had been attacked. I thought someone had fired like a rocket or a mortar on our position. That had exploded nearby, which is what created this dust cloud. And so my instinct was to identify where the enemy was and then neutralize the threat. Now behind me, about 600 meters to the rear, down on the low ground where that other group of men were, there was a small rectangular forestry block, and everything else around that area was just flat mud fields. So in my mind, I thought, okay, if anyone's got any sense, that's where they're going to have launched a rocket or a mortar from, because they've got cover from view and cover from fire. Now, in my mind, bearing in mind I couldn't see anything, I started saying, turn around, Mark, turn around. ID the enemy, start shooting. When you start shooting, or the rest of the lads will start shooting, and then we can hopefully make some sort of tactical withdrawal, get somewhere safer, figure out what we're going to do, and then move forward with a plan. After 4 or 5 times in my mind of saying, turn around, Mark, turn around, even though I couldn't see anything, I realized that my body wasn't doing what my brain was telling it to do, and I couldn't figure out why. And the only thing that I could do in that instance was just wait. Wait for this dust cloud to settle, look around, figure out what was going on, make some very quick decisions on the ground, and hopefully get everyone out of there safely. So that's what I did. And this dust cloud eventually got to about chest height. And I was terrified at this point. I was terrified that my friends may have been hurt or killed. And as I looked around, I couldn't see any of them. I think they had been blasted out of the area when the IED exploded. So I carried on waiting. And then the dust cloud got about 6 inches from the floor and hit the ground and disappeared. And as it did, that's when I looked down to where my legs should have been, and they're both being just completely torn off from the knees down. It's a very surreal experience. I wouldn't say I went into shock, but I think my brain was very much struggling to comprehend what it was looking at. The adrenaline that had been released into my body had numbed the pain. So in that first instance, I was looking at this horrendous sight of where my legs used to be, with blood and fluid and claret just pouring out of my thighs, but not feeling any pain, which was very confusing. And the whole thing was incredibly overwhelming. But I only looked for probably 2 or 3 seconds. And then, I remembered about the rest of my team, and I just kind of, for whatever reason, ignored that. And I looked over my right shoulder to see if I could see any of the rest of my team, and I saw Corporal Helsby, the man that was in charge. Now, we had been through training together back in 2001. We'd been friends for a couple of years. I'd known him quite well. His face was completely devoid of any color. His eyes were huge. He was clearly in a state of shock. And so I'm trying to piece together, what I was looking at and why he looks like that. And I went to look back to my legs, and I got to about this position, and I saw my arm laying in the sand. Now, it was still connected to my body, but from my bicep to my wrist, the whole upper and lower part of my arm had been torn open. All the bones had been shattered. My hand was in pretty good order. I don't know why I did this, but I just kind of picked it up and I held it in front of my face and moved it a little bit, and then just dropped it in the sand and just let out this huge scream as I realized in that moment that we weren't under attack. I realized in that moment that I was the guy that had stood on and detonated an improvised explosive device. Now, we're trained in this situation not to go running in to help the casualty because of the risk of setting off other devices and either hurting yourself or further hurting or injuring the casualty. So I was laying there in what is now a 12-foot by 15-foot crater, surrounded by 6 other improvised explosive devices, knowing that no one was going to come in to run to save me, and effectively bleeding out in the middle of the desert. The only reason that I was able to survive it was because of the professionalism of those 7 men. Now, everybody prior to going on patrol will have a pre-assigned task in case this happens, and every single one of them did their job to the highest possible standard. So I had one guy straight on the radio calling in a medic and a helicopter to evacuate me. I had a 19-year-old on his belly with a bayonet out, prodding the ground and clearing left to right to make a safe route for when the medic got to me. I had someone close to me just constantly talking to me to keep me conscious, because I was in and out of consciousness at this point. And then one of the other guys was coordinating all-round defense in case there was a small arms follow-up attack. And because of what they did, the medic was able to get to me from the camp very, very quickly. He jumped in this crater that I was laying in, put tourniquets on both my legs, put one on my arm, and got me to tighten it to keep me conscious and keep me active. Then picked up what was left of my arm, and what was, part of my right leg was still attached, picked that up, put it on my stomach, and then dragged me onto a stretcher. I closed my eyes at this point because I was in and out of consciousness and just felt exhausted. Just, take the tiredest you've ever been and multiply it by 1,000. That's how I felt. But I was conscious of everything that was going on around me. And he took me out of this crater, took me off this high feature, put me in the back of a vehicle. The vehicle started driving. I could feel it going up the incline to the front entrance of camp that we were due to walk in. And then we must have hit a pothole or something, but the vehicle slammed down quite hard. The medic fell out the back. I went to fall out the back. And then the guy driving turned around, reached out to grab whatever he could grab to hold me kind of half in, half out this vehicle, and ended up grabbing the femur bone that was coming out of my right leg. Now, he left the medic, and that other group of men that we were patrolling with were at the bottom of the incline. So there were 8 heavily armed men at the bottom of that hill, so the medic was safe. the driver carried on driving, got me to the helicopter landed site. And the last thing I remember is this Chinook coming down to land. The sandstorm that gets created from the propeller blades, and then the heat of the exhaust beating down on me, which was the moment I blacked out. And then later, having met all the medics on the back of the Chinook, found out that they had classed me as clinically dead. So they landed Chinook, they put me on the back. There was another casualty in the blast who got shrapnel in his tricep and in his back. So his injuries weren't classed as life-threatening. When they put me on the Chinook, they couldn't get any intravenous lines into me because all of my veins had collapsed because of the massive blood loss. They said I didn't have a pulse when they felt for one. And when they went to put an oxygen mask on me, they said it should have steamed up to show that I was breathing, but it didn't. So they classed me as dead and put me in a corner. Now, luckily, when one of the medics came from the other casualty past me to get some equipment to go back and work on him, he said that my eyes started to flutter, which meant that my heart was still beating. So he alerted some of the other medics. They came over to work on me. And 3 days before I was injured, whoever's in charge of the military medical world had given the go-ahead for this new technique to be used, where if you can't get fluids into somebody through their veins, through the traditional method, you can drill into their tibia and their fibia, and you can administer fluids that way. Problem being, I didn't have any tibias or fibias because they had been torn off by the IED. So the two medics on board, Charlie and Millsy, with very limited options, decided to drill into my hip bone. And this had never been, to my knowledge, never been considered, never been theorized, definitely never been practiced before. But through their lack of options, that was all they can really do. So they drilled into the front and back of my hip. The first time they said that the line didn't take because the skin was too loose. So they pulled the line out, they tightened the skin, went back in, and then they said within about 3.5 minutes, I was awake, responsive, and coherently answering the questions that they were asking me. It still blows my mind to this day, just be that smart or desperate. I don't know what it was, but to take a chance, with no real idea if it'd ever work. And fortunately for me, it did. Now, I don't know if this was by design or by luck or what, but I woke up for about 15 seconds, I think, on the 28th of December. And the next day, that I think they reduced my medication to bring me out of this coma for a little bit longer. And I remember the first day I remember is thinking that I had just lost some toes and some fingers. And then literally I did a week in intensive care, and each day I realized more and more the severity of my injury bit by bit. And then on the last day, day 7, I pulled my arm out, my right arm, because I was right arm dominant, from under the sheet, the bed sheet, to scratch my nose, which I'd been doing for the 7 days prior. And I'd been hallucinating as well because of the medication. And I pulled it out and I looked at it and I giggled. And the nurse said, "What are you laughing for?" And so I'm hallucinating again. It looks like my arm's falling off. And she just gave me that look as if to say, how do I tell him? She didn't need to tell me. By that point, I realized both my legs were missing above the knee. Now I knew it was my right arm above the elbow. It wasn't just fingers and toes. So day 7, I think it was, I understood the severity of my injuries. But it was almost like they drip fed it to me bit by bit. And again, I don't know if they did it on purpose or if it was just luck. But by day 7, I certainly wouldn't say I had accepted it. I understood it fully, though, the extent of my injuries.
And how does that realization hit you?
It wasn't like a bang, and into depression or anything like that. It was like this gradual process. And I think if you combine the medication, the people around me, and all those factors, it was almost like I was able to, again, I'm not gonna say accept it in that early phase, but understand it and deal with it better. It wasn't like I just woke up and, understood straight away and just went into this downward spiral. It was kind of the drip feed that enabled me to understand it bit by bit.
And mentally, does something like this take a massive toll?
It did. Yeah, I don't mind admitting during that first 6 weeks, there were a lot of tears, um, a lot of temper tantrums, a lot of dark thoughts. Um, I did contemplate suicide within the first couple of weeks. I spent an entire night crying the first time I saw myself in a full length mirror. But again, I think I was very lucky, and those were the only two wobbles that I had. The rest of the time, it was just like, give me a goal and get out of my way. And that was it. I kind of applied the Royal Marines mindset to my rehabilitation. You just got to do it. That there was no system in place because I was the first triple amputee. So we just had to play with things, test and adjust. Some of the most difficult things were like brushing my teeth. Because I was right hand dominant, I didn't have the fine motor skills to be able to do that. So for about 3 weeks, I used to hold my toothbrush and just do this. And same with shaving. I'd have to put shaving foam on and move my head rather than move the razor because I couldn't do any of these things. But eventually, your brain retrains itself, and then, you know, through lack of options, I guess. But it was still pretty challenging. And then walking was a whole other level, because I'm missing both my legs above the knee. It takes between 300 and 500% more energy for me to do anything than an able-bodied person. And as fit and as strong as I was, I still could hardly do, like, on mornings where I had to rehab without being exhausted. So it's a big, big adjustment. And if I'm being perfectly honest, it was very lonely in the beginning because there was nobody with my level of injuries. People came in with feet missing, fingers missing, that kind of stuff. But it was very lonely in the beginning. And for me, once I got out of hospital, because I don't like sitting around doing nothing, and that's all you can do in those first couple of weeks. Once I knew I was going to get issue with my legs and my arm and start some sort of physical rehabilitation program, I was locked in then. I set myself some goals and just wanted to get better as quickly as I possibly could.
What goals did you set?
My first one was to walk at the Meadows Parade. My unit was still deployed. They had 5 weeks left in Afghanistan. They were going to come back home and have 9 or 10 weeks, what we call post-operational tour leave, and then come back to the unit for this big ceremonial Medals Day parade. Now, I knew, or I thought most people would assume that I would attend that in a wheelchair. So I wanted to get to a reasonable level of independence with my legs and then walk on a parade ground and stand shoulder to shoulder with those men and receive my medal stood. Um, so I launched myself into this grueling rehabilitation program of just getting used to these legs, learning the techniques of how they operate and how they work, building up my strength and conditioning and cardio to be able to do that. And that was all I really cared about for the first couple of weeks. And because of that, I was able to do that. I walked on the parade ground, stood up to get my medal, um, and realized that that was how I needed to live my life from that moment on. I had just set out on was just about to set out on a fundraising adventure, running from New York to LA with a group of friends. And I got a phone call from a retired brigadier in the Royal Marines who was at the time the chief executive of what was the Royal Marines Association. And he rang me up, and we had met briefly at some funerals after I was injured, but we didn't really know each other. And he said, Mark, it's Brigadier Hobson. Do you want a job? And I said, yes, please, sir. What do you want me to do? He said, I have no idea. We'll make it up. Be in the office at this date at this time. And that was it. And I went out and did the run. It took 3.5 months, came back, went to see him about this job. We made up a job, like a fundraising job, and I did it for 10 years. Spent 10 years working within the Royal Marines Association, which then evolved to the Royal Marines Charity, raising funds, raising awareness, working with men and women in situations like mine and their families, just helping out where I could.
Did you feel like you rediscovered a purpose?
Absolutely. And it was twofold because I didn't want to leave the military. I didn't want to leave the lads. I didn't want to leave that environment. So that job meant that I could stay in that world and operate in that world. But it absolutely gave me a purpose again because then I realized that my situation could be a blessing in disguise, and I could use it to do good in the world. And on a selfish note, being a former Royal Marine at the time, physicality was a big part of my identity, and I was learning to run and swim and all these things, and I managed to be able to combine the two. I thought I want to challenge myself selfishly and do runs and swims and everything, but now I have this job which involves raising money, so why don't I just combine the two, and do good? And that's what I did. 10 years, well, more than 10 years of doing silly events, runs and swims and bike rides and pulling trucks and climbing mountains and raising money at the same time and making some lifelong friendships.
And then, is that how then you got involved in the Invictus Games?
Yeah, kind of. The communities kind of intertwine, if you like. But I actually rebelled against adaptive sport in the beginning. I never used it as a part of my recovery. I didn't like it. Before I was injured, I was a competitive kickboxer, a Muay Thai, and a boxer. I never did track and field, never did team sports, or tennis or anything like that. And my uh, completely wrong impression of adaptive sports was that they're all about pity and sympathy, and I didn't want to operate in that world. Um, but in 2016, I was sat at home and I was planning out what I wanted to achieve in 2017, and I realized that Christmas Eve 2017 was my 10-year anniversary. So I thought I want to do something that I haven't done, and sport was the only thing that I hadn't done. And the Invictus Games was 2 years old at that point, and I had seen my friends go out and train and compete and win medals, and that was great. But because I knew them when the cameras were off, I saw their confidence increase. I saw them reintegrate with their families. I saw them excited for life outside of the military, and so I saw the benefits of it outside of winning medals. So I applied for the team. Honestly, didn't think I'd have any chance of making it because I was outside of those circles. I didn't know any of the sports, hadn't trained in them, didn't know how any of that world even worked of competitive adaptive sports. But I had to go anyway. Was fortunate enough to make the team for Canada in 2017. Set my goals of winning gold medals. Didn't do that. And then reapplied the following year to go out to Australia. Again, setting a goal to win gold medals. Approached it with a different mindset and different strategy this time round, and was able to do what I set out to do. It helped me to challenge myself in a different way because I had never competed as an adaptive athlete, so that was a new world and a new challenge for me. It also helped to calm my ego, I think. The first year I went into it quite arrogant. I thought I'm a former Royal Marine. I'm pretty fit. I'll just turn up and outwork everybody. But it doesn't work that way. Which I found out the first year. And then I humbled myself, went back, took it a lot more seriously, understood that these men and women were actual high level elite athletes, and I had to try and be one too. Went back and like I said, succeeded that second time round. But yeah, it was a game changer. And actually looking back, I wish it was something that I'd done a lot sooner in my recovery.
Do you feel proud of what you've managed to achieve since then?
Yes, yes, I do feel proud. It's been a journey, and it has been rough at times. But when I look back on it, it's been an adventure as well, and I wouldn't change it. It's been really, really difficult at times, but I can honestly say that I think my life now is better than it would have been had I not been injured. I've had better opportunities, Well, I don't know that. I've had more opportunities. I've met great people. I've been able to do some incredible things. I feel very fortunate for all of these experiences and all these people that I've met. And it's made me, who I am today. And I think this is what life is about, right? It's about discovering your full potential. Now, I don't know if I would have been able to do that, or if I'd have wanted to do that had I guess, not been forced to do that. So I'm very lucky, very grateful, and I wouldn't change it.